And so Pre-Seed 2.0 to us means supporting founders through each of those kind of early stages before you come up with the idea, the team, you're ready to leave, that sort of thing. You're also just looking for little kind of tidbits and insights. And maybe it's on the 50th call and that person doesn't even want to buy your software, but they say something that kind of points you in the right direction. People that have good taste and ideas plus focused aggression. You might have like a barbell where you raise a little bit of money early, and if things really start working, you raise a lot of money later.
Jack, welcome to Venture Grounds. Good to see you.
Thank you. Yeah, this place is awesome.
Love it. Well, to kick things off, why don't you give a brief background on yourself and tell us more about Afore?
Yeah, I'm Jack. I'm from the San Francisco Bay Area. I live in New York right now, actually right around the corner from where we're at on Attorney Street.
Beautiful day.
Yeah, exactly. And yeah, I'm at Afore, so we are a pre-seed kind of software-focused fund looking for exceptional founders at the earliest stages. Before Afore, I joined right out of college, so I was studying computer science and finance at Boston College. And before that, I interned with a couple other VC firms like Excel and Battery Ventures and Foundation Capital, and some companies too like CrowdStrike and Eightfold.
Cool. Love it. Awesome. Well, kicking things off, the anatomy of a pre-founder. You spent a lot of time thinking about pre-founders. What's the clearest moment when you realize someone is crossing the line from tinkerer to true founder? What's the internal shift they go through that you wish more people understood?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think it's easier to start a company today than ever, which is a good thing. I think increasing access is a good thing for entrepreneurs. That being said, it makes it easy to bootstrap your side projects, get a prototype out there, get some early users, but that doesn't necessarily mean that everyone should be a founder. It's a pretty serious decision, so I think you have to be pretty serious about it. You have to be willing to make a bunch of compromises, and I think it is a mindset shift that you have to kind of choose. I think there are lots of people that are very strong operators that could start up some things on the side and perhaps maybe not ready to raise venture funding. Maybe they're fine with bootstrapping it and not raising for a bit, or maybe they kind of need to go through a mindset shift in order to become ready to truly become a founder. So I think it's mainly being willing to take the earliest stages of the journey very seriously, because that sets the tone for how you take the later stages of the journey as well. And taking the early stages seriously, I think, means being committed to finding a really interesting idea, to scrapping ideas if they aren't working, to going all in on something if it does seem to be working, and then having a sort of kind of focused aggression as well. So these things I think you just have to mentally prepare for. But that being said, anyone can be a pre-founder, I guess. There's all sorts of backgrounds. You don't just have to come from the hot companies. As long as you have a commitment to taking the leap and finding a really good idea and then having that focused aggression, then as long as that mindset is there, then anyone can do it.
Love it. Expanding on that, Pre-Seed 2.0 is the center of Afore's work. Can you define it? What problem in the ecosystem does it solve and that the outside world still fully doesn't appreciate?
Yeah, that's a good question. So Afore was started in 2016 by Anna Mitra, who's the first product manager at Twitter, and Gaurav, who was at Android Nexus at Google, the first PM there. They thought that seed investors were kind of acting like Series A investors, but trying to go a little bit earlier. So basically, looking for the same archetype of founder, looking for traction, but just trying to go like one stage earlier. So very similar. And they thought, what if we could do something a lot different and maybe make a category called pre-seed? So they helped launch that in 2016, and I guess that would be considered pre-seed 1.0. The idea was just find really interesting people, and you don't have to wait for traction. Sometimes you meet a team and you think, this team is going to execute. They've got really strong backgrounds. They're going to get to traction. They're going to ship an MVP. It's going to do really well. And then in 8 months, a year, they'll raise a seed round. But instead of waiting for that seed round and waiting for the MVP and traction, you can invest now. With the new fund, which is Fund 4, $185 million fund, we were thinking about this term called Pre-Seed 2.0 that we announced in the blog post. What that means, it's kind of a similar mindset to what I was saying earlier about seed investors mimicking Series A investors. I think right now when people think pre-seed, all they think of is just like, all right, now I can bet on someone with an idea and maybe traction doesn't matter as much. But what we're thinking is a mindset shift as well, where you're investing truly into the person. So there are a lot of things that have to happen before you come up with a fantastic idea, and the full package is there. You've quit your job, you're ready to fundraise. For example, you might be figuring out when to quit your job, to your question earlier, or you might be trying to figure out who your co-founder could be, or you're trying to come up with a good idea. And so Pre-Seed 2.0 to us means supporting founders through each of those kind of early stages before you come up with the idea, the team, you're ready to leave, that sort of thing.
Yeah. So pre-idea, just finding exceptional people that you guys can work with to kind of shape their vision, maybe.
Correct. Exactly. Truly people-focused investing. Instead of just taking a stage and saying, let's go a little earlier, you're kind of rethinking it and saying, let's just bet on the person. Let's help them find a co-founder, come up with the idea, invite them to work out of our office. We have a founders in residence program that helps with all these things.
I mean, that's been going phenomenal. I mean, you can share a little bit more about that.
Yeah. We take like a very small number of people. The founder in residence program, and thank you guys for supporting so many of our companies in the program. We take a small number of people and we invite them to work out of our office for about 8 weeks. And it's I think of it as like an 8-week sprint on testing assumptions as quickly as possible. Because there's no arbitrary traction goal you want to set for people or fundraising pressure you want to put on the end of it, like a demo day. We more just want to meet people where they're at and work with a very small number of people instead of a large batch so that we can work with them very closely. And that's kind of what it looks like. We run a couple cohorts per year. We're considering switching it to kind of on a more rolling basis so we can constantly be accepting people and be more flexible that way. And the goal is to test assumptions and maybe not accelerate you towards a traction or fundraising goal, but support you at the earliest stages.
Love it. Doubling down on that. I mean, reading 10,000 early applications gives you a rare lens. What's something you're seeing in the data, patterns, behaviors, founder types that even other VCs haven't caught on to yet?
Yeah. Yes, we had this program, Afore Alpha, and we got over 10,000 applications in the first 2 years. And it's tough because you don't really want to pattern match as a VC because you might miss the outliers. I would say actually, if you were to look for something or what patterns or trends there might be in those 10,000 applications, it's that there are some applications that really stand out. I was thinking about this back to when I applied to college and I was trying to craft the perfect essay and make every question like just good and acceptable. And now I think it's more about saying something that really catches the interviewer or reviewer's attention. If they're reading through 10,000, there are going to be many that are good, and I think you just have to say something that's a little bit unique. And so I think out of those 10,000 applications, some things that stood out would be when there's really strong founder market fit. For example, we invested in one founder out of that program that he used to work on the Uber Eats data science team. And he started a restaurant actually as a side project back in India, and he was building software for restaurants to automate back office stuff. But the founder market fit was so strong there. He had the engineering background at Uber Eats, and he'd started a restaurant, and he was building in the space. And so that was completely pre-traction and pre-everything, but that stood out. And I think there are a couple other examples where people are able to effectively say something in the application that really catches your attention and then keeps it.
Yeah. Wow. The new 0 to 1 playbook. You coach founders at their earliest possible stage. What's a piece of marketing or GTM advice or a pattern for operators you trust that consistently helps founders break through those first few months?
Yeah, it's a good question. I asked my roommate, who's a current founder, about how we could best support him and his investors that he respects, how they've supported him too. And it goes back to the thing that I said earlier about testing assumptions very quickly. Different types of companies will probably need to test different assumptions. And so if you put a goal of you need to get to X amount of revenue in the first couple months, that might work for some companies, but not others. Like Figma, where they had to take a couple of years to build a product, and VCs are probably asking, are you talking to users? And
consumer, B2B, no. I mean, it's totally different for each.
100%, exactly. So it depends on industry, like you said, or maybe the founder's background. If they are building in dev tools and they are their target user, they don't necessarily need to talk to a billion customers. I would recommend it for most people, but some people are so opinionated and they are their own customer that they can just hunker down and build. So I would say figuring out what the number one biggest assumption you have to test is for your company to become big, or just to de-risk this next stage, and then really going aggressively at that number one thing, because that's the thing that matters.
Doubling down on that, what are ways you're helping founders flush that out at that earliest stage?
Yeah.
What are some things that you guys do as a fund?
Yeah, it's an individual conversation with each team to figure out first what it is for maybe the week or maybe for the month. And then we try and connect them with people in our network. If they're building in B2B SaaS, for example, we can try and connect them to 10 CFOs if you're building for an office of the CFO kind of software platform. And you can quickly figure out across, maybe even more than, you might have to have more than 10 conversations, maybe 50 or maybe even more than that. So I think it is a volume game because aside from just looking at how many of them, what percentage of them would buy this, they might tell you what you want to hear. You're also just looking for little kind of tidbits and insights. And maybe it's on the 50th call and that person doesn't even want to buy your software, but they say something that kind of points you in the right direction. So I think, and if it's for consumer too, you probably want to build an early prototype and then test retention. There's different, I think, ways to test it for each company, but figuring out what the assumption is and then connecting them to people who can help them test it or people that can help them build it.
Standing out when everyone sounds the same. When you meet someone for the first time, what makes you lean in? And what subtle traits signal that someone isn't ready yet, even if their resume looks great?
100%. I think people that are able to really quickly capture your attention and then hold it, kind of as I was talking about earlier. If there's someone who's looking at a high number of applications or meeting with a large number of people, that's always something to keep in mind, is like you kind of have to stand out. And so in that case, some sort of hook or spike at the very beginning helps a lot. The other things that I think stand out to me personally, every investor will be different when you ask them what makes for a great founder. But one of my colleagues, Derek at Afore, has this framework around people that have good taste and ideas plus focused aggression. Taste and ideas means like, can you come up with a good idea? A little bit subjective, but there's some people that consistently seem to come up with really interesting ideas that you hear it and you think like that actually sounds like it might work. Maybe there's some things to test. And they consistently do this. They're able to go to a company and figure out what their biggest problem is and what the high willingness to pay is and target that particular problem. Oftentimes these are second-time founders, but I think more and more first-time founders are discovering good frameworks to come up with good ideas. Just good taste in general. And then the second one is focused aggression. So if you find people that just have really good taste but don't have the aggression part, you probably end up with like artists and philosophers, which are great, but sometimes make it hard to build like a massive company.
Execute.
So yeah, execution's super important. And I think aggression can come across in a bunch of different ways. It doesn't just have to be a hard-hitting like salesperson who's talking about how aggressive they are. It could be a really quiet engineer, but then you look at their wall, and one of our founders had not just whiteboards, but like physical Post-it notes and papers everywhere, and you could tell that he was extremely focused, extremely locked in, even as a quiet guy. Yeah. So I think taste and ideas and focused aggression is something that that I personally like to see.
That's great. Where the next breakout companies will come from? You've gone deep on AI infrastructure. Where do you see the biggest mispriced opportunities right now? Areas where founders should dig in, but maybe aren't?
Yeah, it's a good question. We're pretty open-minded at Afore in terms of industry. That being said, a couple ideas for this one. First is people that are able to, like I said, find the biggest problem, find the biggest customers and solve their biggest problem. Right now, that looks like these Mercor, data curve type hyperscalers that are selling data into foundational model companies, getting to quick revenue traction, and then using that as a wedge to build brand, raise funding, attract the best people. And then I think you have to have an act two that's really important. You can't just have your plan forever to sell to foundational model companies. Perhaps what they need today is data labeling, but tomorrow it's RL environments. After that, it's something else. So there is something to be said about selling stuff into them and staying nimble and staying at the forefront, but also I think having an act two. Like a data curve, for example, has an asset of a bunch of really talented students, and they can do stuff with that now. They can use it for things other than selling to foundational model companies. So I think people that find big scaling customers, solve big problems, get a bunch of money, and then have an act two is one category. And generally, I think younger founders too have more of an advantage nowadays than ever because it's easier to start a business. There's people that will support you like you guys. There's also more frameworks and ideas to help you avoid the mistakes. And then also, I think students are kind of at the forefront oftentimes of the newest AI infra, as opposed to maybe an engineer at a big tech company who's making a lot of money and comfortable in their job. They've been there for 10 years and not necessarily incentivized to push the boundaries, versus students are thinking, I got to stay up to date with the latest model releases. I've got to be building. So I think there will be some great companies built by students that previously would have been hard to build because the infrastructure to support them wasn't there, and also the incentives weren't there.
Yeah, they have a lot of raw horsepower. 100%. I mean, even expanding on that, like talk about like the student founder game. Like it's kind of everywhere right now. Everyone's focusing on it. I would love to hear just from your perspective, like because you have founder in residence, but like, how are you getting access to these really, really high-profile students, or how are you sourcing them or like helping them through that journey?
Yeah, I think a lot of we have a university edition of our founder in residence program too, and it does seem like in general VCs are willing to bet on students more than ever, which is a good thing. I think there will be many that don't work, but many that work too. A lot of our student founders have been driven by scouts, and especially like interns that we've had at Afore. Every intern I think that we've had at Afore has either started a company that we've invested in
several
or referred us.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. So the student scouts have been great. We have an open application. We go to campuses and try and talk to people. And I think there's a couple, depending on what industry you're in, there's some good arguments for why students can build some big companies. First is if you're in consumer, I mean, that's what students have always been good at, that's what you know. Second is if you're in dev tools, to the point that we made just now about how students are at the cutting edge. They're trying to build on top of the latest models, that sort of thing. I think students are now able to build really big dev tools companies for that reason. And then the last is one archetype that we've seen is students who get really obsessed with some niche vertical SaaS or B2B SaaS topic, perhaps because one of our companies called Automax, his family was in the real estate appraisal space. And so he started out as an engineer by automating some things for his family's business, and then ended up realizing he could spin that out as his own business and become a tech-enabled appraiser himself. And they went through our FIR program and NYC as well. So that profile, I think, is exciting too. If you can get distracted by building really interesting dev tools or consumer tools, but you choose to focus on this really kind of esoteric or weird like B2B SaaS niche, probably means you, could be huge, and you probably have some secret that other people don't have. Maybe your family's in the business, or maybe you just went down a rabbit hole.
I love that. You made a huge bet on New York and on going earlier. Walk us into the future you're betting on. What becomes normal for founders 5 years from now, and what would feel unusual or even risky today?
100%. I think when I came to New York at first, the thesis was more that there were some really good Series A funds and growth stage funds and some great seed funds too, but not that many pre-seed funds that are specifically very people-focused in New York. Now, if you go out to the Bay Area, I think everyone's grandma's an angel investor. People are very people-focused out there, but I think the tide is turning in New York, and I think that's a good thing, where people are becoming more people-focused, more investing at the pre-seed, earliest stages, maybe even pre-idea for some firms too, which is great. And so I think the future of New York will look like more venture capitalists that are willing to go earlier and be people-focused. I also think, to the point about students just now, New York has always been a place that young people want to come to post-grad. And because young people now are able to start companies more easily, there will be many more unicorns in New York started by very young people that move here right out of college, that are ambitious and now have the tools to build something big. Then the last thing is, I believe there's a person, who wrote about New York being an industry town. This is the best city in the world if you're trying to sell into obviously consulting firms, investment banks, restaurants.
Anything outside of software only.
Basically anything outside of selling to other startups.
Yeah.
If you're selling to other startups, the Bay Area is obviously a great place, but New York has everything else.
Yeah.
And so I think two things. One is that it'll make it easier for someone that is exceptional in their industry to spin out and start something in tech. For example, someone who is a really sharp quant finance person, maybe. They're making a lot of money at Jane Street, but now they're realizing it's easier to start a company, and previously they would have had to get a technical co-founder very early on to get a prototype, but now they don't have to do that. Now they can build a prototype with one of these no-code tools. And also, because New York is this industry town, there will be many big application layer AI companies built here too.
Yeah, I feel like I probably know who you're talking about. Now into the espresso questions. What's one view you hold about the market that most investors would disagree with?
So I think consumer AI is now back in vogue, because there have been big consumer companies built in every platform shift, and AI is a platform shift. I think one interesting thesis I have, based on my current roommate again, is that there will be some really large consumer AI companies built by AI researchers specifically, not necessarily like the typical side business started in high school profile, but serious AI researchers who spent their lives in AI research, because I think the best consumer products, people use them because the product is really good. And I think to build a really good product in AI now, you have to come from a research background a lot of the time.
Yeah, wow. What's one conviction you've completely rethought in the past year?
Yes, I think there's all this talk about attention being really important nowadays. I subscribe to that. I also think that while getting attention is really important, I've thought a lot more recently about how building trust, getting attention with trust attached is really important too. If you get attention for the wrong reasons and you break people's trust, then it's almost not worth it. People are going to churn off of your platform, whether it's consumer or enterprise. So you can be splashy and say controversial things, but I think it's really important to do that with a long-term lens of how do I get attention, but also build trust. So the trust aspect is, I think, what I've kind of skewed more towards recently.
Yeah. Can you expand a little bit on that? Like are you talking about founders posting on LinkedIn, or like obviously there's like so much content being produced by founders in their own companies?
Totally, yeah. Content is extremely important. Attention is extremely important, and people have realized that in order to get attention, you have to be controversial a lot of the times. You can also let your product speak for itself, but I think, Yeah, you can kind of push the boundaries. If you're a little bit too controversial, or you oftentimes you say something controversial, 90% of the replies hate it, and 10% of them are interested and want to try it out, that's fine. Previously, that 10% could sustain a really interesting business. If 10% of people buy your course, then it's fine, and all the haters don't matter. But now I think trust is becoming important. If you ever pivot your company around, which happens a lot at the pre-seed stage, you need for your users to trust your brand and not just want to use your tool or course for the direct utility that they provide right now. So I think building trust is very important.
Love it. What's the risk most of venture is sleepwalking past right now?
Yeah, there's probably a couple risks with AI making it easier to build things nowadays. One risk is that founders just don't need to raise money at all. I think that's a little bit less likely. So you can maybe come up with a really good idea off the bat, start making money, and use that to fund pivots and other ideas. More likely, though, is a second scenario where you raise a little bit of money up front. Maybe you skip a pre-seed rounds. Maybe you skip a bunch of rounds, and then at some point, as you're building something that's working, other people take notice, the space becomes competitive, and now you need to raise a lot of money, maybe more of a growth stage round, in order to stand out, build a big brand, put the money into marketing. And so in that case, you might have like a barbell where you raise a little bit of money early, and if things really start working, you raise a lot of money later.
So maybe like even skipping, like if you raise a pre-seed, you skip a seed, go straight to an A.
Yeah, exactly.
I've heard a lot of, like, the game has just completely changed now.
Exactly.
Who's a company, founder, or sector you're fascinated by at the moment, and why?
Yeah, I'll say my current roommate, his name is Colin, and we went to high school together back in the day in the Bay Area. He came from the AI research background, and he's building a consumer company. He's building a research lab and product company focused around conversational AI experiences. Obviously, this starts out, it's me and Afore, so we get excited by the person first, and then we talk about the idea too. And every time I talk to him, I'm more excited. I think he takes the foundational stages of building a company very seriously, which I respect a lot. I think his ability to hire and recruit is fantastic, and he's a very talented AI researcher, and I think we'll build a big company in the conversational AI space.
Well, are you guys investors?
Yes.
Okay, that works out
Absolutely.
great.
Portfolio company.
Well, yeah, man, that's it. Thanks for coming on. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.
Good to see
Appreciate it. Nice to see you.